Hi, this is Jonathan Wood from Soft Circuits, and in this video I'd like to talk about using the MFC CDHtmlDialog class. This class allows you to create a dialog box that is based on HTML, and let's go ahead and create a new project. And it'll be an MFC application, and we'll call it DHTML Dialog. And I'm just going to accept the defaults for the project. Now, CDHtml dialog, what that stands for, the C is indicates it's a class name, and that's the convention used on all MFC classes. And the DHTML stands for Dynamic Hypertext Markup Language, which is the what's used on the internet. And it's a dialog class and derives from the regular C dialog box class. So in order to create a class for this, we'll start by creating our dialog template, and we're going to do that just the same way that we do it for a regular dialog box. The only difference is we don't need any controls because those will all be supplied by the HTML code. Now we can have controls in the dialog box, and they will appear on top of the HTML code. I'm not aware of any reason you'd want to do that, but perhaps you'll come up with a reason. So now we just have an empty dialog box, and let's go ahead and add a class, and we'll call it our DHTML dialog. And for the base class, instead of CDialog, which is the default, we're going to put CDHtmlDialog. And then we'll go ahead and finish that. Now, one thing a CDHtmlDialog box does is it will use the HTML code. While you can reference a URL, the way it's kind of set up is it actually creates a resource that gets compiled into your executable file, and that's considered an HTML resource. And here we are in the resource view, and we can see we now have an HTML tab, and if we bring that up, we have some HTML that will appear in our dialog box. So there we have our dialog box with nothing, and I just showed the HTML. Let's go ahead and run that. But before we do, we need to add a command so we can access it. So let's bring up our menu, and let's go ahead and add a command to the view menu. Let's put a separator in there, and add a menu command, and then we'll add an event handler for that. And we'll just go ahead and put it in our mainframe for no particular reason. And so now we have a handler. And now when we created a class for our DHTML dialog, it put it in the source files DHTMLDLG.h, and so we'll need to include that in order to access it. And we use it just pretty much like a regular dialog. And let's run that. And I didn't put a C at the beginning of our class name, so that's not important, but we need to make sure that we don't use one when we reference it. So there's our menu command, and I'll click on that, and we get the the dialog template. That's the HTML that the wizard's created for us. And click OK, and we dismiss the dialog box. Now, on the HTML, Visual Studio does have an HTML designer. We can view it in a kind of WYSIWYG mode, or we can view the source. And I'm going to modify this a bit. For one thing, we have the older style HTML that has a uses all uppercase, and that's not the way things are done these days. So we'll put in a head, and we'll put in a title. And we need a little CSS style. Put some overall styles, and then we'll go ahead and add a table. So let's give that a style. We'll have the table take up the entire available width. We'll collapse the borders. And we'll give it a light blue background. And we'll give our cells a style. We'll have a border around them. And finally, our header. Our table header, we'll give it a little different color. And then we close out our header. Now, notice the ID here, which we're going to update appearance a little bit. The IDs are very important for any objects that you want to access from code, because the ID is the name of the object. So in order to access elements such as buttons and text box and things like that, we do need to have an ID that is valid, that we can use. And so we'll go ahead and put a paragraph in. And we'll go ahead and put a table in. And we'll just do something kind of quick here. It's just for test purposes. And put in a couple of regular rows, table rows. Now if we go to the design view, we can kind of see how this is looking. We'll go ahead and go ahead and put a little text box, input box here, and then to the right we'll put our OK and cancel button. And again, these should be lowercase. And again, we have our ID. That's very important, so we can reference those from code. And I think that's about it. Take a look at it. And let's go ahead and run that. So now we're looking a little bit more like a like we have something going here. Nothing that really makes a lot of sense, but we've got some styles and we've got our basic dialog box. Now let's go and look at the modules, the code that the wizard created for us when we created a class for our dialog box. You'll see we have a message map and we have an event map, and the event map uses this DHTML_event_onClick. That's one of the macros available for DHTML events. And then for the name, we have button OK and button cancel. And if we go to the HTML that we're using for our HTML resource, we see that that's the same names used for the ID for those buttons. And so that's how they're wired up. And then we have a name of a method, on button OK and on button cancel. And that means that these methods are called as a result of those buttons being clicked. Now we also have a text box, and we've given it an ID of text1, and so it'd be nice to be able to set that. So let's go ahead and we'll add a variable to our DHTMLDialog class, and we'll just make it a C string, m_s text. And we want to now make that control available from our code. Now I'm only going to have time for just to get into this briefly. Basically we have a doDataExchange, which is the same, basically works the same as the regular CDialog class uses to exchange values with controls. And we're actually using a kind of a COM interface to access events, and if you need to do a lot of programmatically access the HTML elements and respond to events, then that gets a little bit involved. But for a basic example of how we'll access the values of, in this case, an edit control, we will add some code to our doDataExchange, and we'll call it DDX_DHTML_element_value macro. And we pass the data exchange object, and we pass the name of the control, and in this case it's our ID of the the edit control in our HTML resource. And finally, we need a reference to the string variable we just created, and so that will be saved, or rather the data will be returned from the edit control. So now if we go back to where we used the CDHtmlDialog class that we just created, we can go ahead and set that set the value of that text and then when the dialog box is displayed, we can that will initialize the text, and then once we're done, we'll go ahead and display a little message box with the resulting value of that text box. And actually this should be if the doModal method returns ID OK, and that means OK was pressed, and that works the same in the DHTML dialog box as it does in regular dialog boxes. So let's go ahead and run that, and we'll open our dialog box, and we see that here's our initial value. That's text is what it defaults to, and we'll change it to here's our new value. And when I click OK, that should appear in the message box, and there it is. So we're restoring the code, or rather setting and saving the value. And if I run it and I click cancel, we'll return a value other than ID OK, and no message box is displayed because doModal, this if statement here, doesn't it returns false or evaluates to false. So that's a brief overview of the CDHtmlDialog class. There's a lot of stuff you could do there. Definitely more work than a regular dialog box class, and there's not quite as good a support from the wizards. But if that's what your application could benefit from, that's definitely something to look into.